Welcome along, everybody.
Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen.
We'll give it just a moment here for everybody to get logged on.
From the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. Get ready now for 30
Evening, Chris.
of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Yeah.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Martin.
What could this be? Ah, it's a Limehouse Blues.
Oh, that just made my glasses much worse. Hey, Natalie. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Natalie. Natalie Santiago. The goatee be an interesting question. I've got more of a soul patch going here. Hey, Maria. Hey, Julianne. Hey, Patty. Hey, Becky. Hey, Leah. Bridget, Bruce, Eric, Mike, Gladys. I know I missed some people back here. Hey, Patty. And Maria, Julianne, Lori, and Debbie. Hey, Randall. Hey, Susan. Hey, Chris. Just reached for my glass and grabbed the whole bottle. That's not good. Hey, Jerry in the Quad Cities. To the Peggy Hill accent. Let's los estudiantes son mis amigos. Hey, Bart. Hey, Dave. Judy. Debbie. Hey, Jean. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Katie. Evening, Maureen. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Sherlock. The guys I speak to in Hebrew in the morning probably think I have about the same kind of accent as Peggy Hill. Hey, Karen. Hey, Geraldine. Hey, Napur. Hey, Georgie. Hey, Kristen in Newton, Wisconsin. Yeah, just announced next Saturday's tour will be Rose Hill. Hopefully we'll have some better weather than we get this week. Hey, evening, Jordana. Hey, Paula. Hey, Trish. Hey, Timothy. You know, I think this is one of my favorite ones, really. It doesn't get the biggest numbers of all of my tours by any means, but it's one of the better ones, I think. Hey, Lorena. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Christine and Rob. Hi, Susie. Hey, Paula. Nothing wrong with Carol Channing. It's just not who you want to sound like when you're trying to speak in Spanish. Jerry, yeah, I do Oakwoods. I'll actually be there pretty soon, and also October 3rd, we're doing a cleanup in the Jewish section there, as part of Mystericon 2021. Hey, Susan. Hey, Marie. Hey, Lindsay. Hey, Pat. Hey, Deb. Jerry, I was just thinking I should do the virtual Oakwoods one again, in fact. Hey, Jill. Hey, Terry. Octavio, no. No, I never took Spanish. I don't know much of it. Grave robbing, I hope we'll be able to do really soon. It's just very difficult. If you went on the morning mini tour yesterday, they're working on doing new landscaping in the area where I do that tour in person. Good evening, everybody. Hey, Lizette. Evening, Gary. Semper Fi. Evening, Carol. I stayed mostly cool today. Hey, Amy in Alaska. Alright, hope nobody's sending me tech support questions, because I am about to close the mailbox. Hey, Mary, it's tricky, the Mount Carmel one. It's partly I don't know if the Archdiocese is going to want me doing it. And also, it's off of the way out of public transportation, so I'm never sure what kind of a crowd I can get for it. Hey, Charles. Hey, Patty. Hey, Amy.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
No pie today. We've been doing housework all day. Hey, Paul. Need some miles? Well, here we go. Yeah, we got miles. Here's some miles for you. Evening, Susan. Hey, no one on YouTube. Hey, Dina, Chris. And Miles is just stationed beside his cat dancer toy, which he remains obsessed with 2 months after Layla got it for him. Well, more than that, now he's had this thing the whole summer. Near enough. Yeah, Miles? Is that right? Sue, that'd be day after tomorrow. Hey, Marley. Hey, Patty and Grimes. I have been to Grimes. There's a park I used to go to in Grimes just occasionally. I couldn't tell you what it was called. Evening, Jackie. Oh, hey, Savannah. Hey, Amanda. You have pie? I don't have pie. What I do have is some Albanese gummies, and those are pretty delicious, too. Hey, Karen. Ronnie got me some gummies. Do I have any trips planned out of town? I do not at the moment. Hey, Keely. Hey, then Kendra. Hey, Lamanda. Hey, Barbara. Hey, Renee. Some other Albanese fans out there, I see. Now and then, when driving back and forth to Ohio, we'll stop at the Albanese factory store where you can get like a garbage bag of factory seconds for $4. Hey, Grandma Belle. Hey, Karen. Of course, if I tell people I'm basically living on gummies, then they assume I mean the special gummies. If I tried to live off of those, it'd be ugly. Hey, Jane and Phoenix. Laura, that's the one. I think it's in Merrillville. Hey, Linda. Hey, Ann. Jackie. No, I stuck around a little while. I got myself one of the best ever grilled cheese sandwiches. It was pretty good. And I got a jar of the 5-cheese garlic spread that I get most years at the farmers markets. Erev Tov, Lisa. Evening, Christy. I've been to Galveston once and New Orleans once. Hey, June. Evening, Aviva. Barbara, the best ever grilled cheese is how they marketed it. And it was pretty good. It was like a buttercrust cheese, or however you pronounce that, on sourdough with butter. And it was tasty. It was a very good grilled cheese. I feel like the margarita one would have been especially good with the basil and tomato. Hey, Bob. Evening, Aaron. Hey, Christine. Hey, Jacqueline. Now, the best ever grilled cheese place is, they've got an outlet in Block 37 downtown, which appears on both the Gangster and the H.H. Holmes tours, as both Bugs Moran and H.H. Holmes once had offices on the space where Block 37 now stands. Hey, Rhonda in Gainesville. Hey, Jenny. Hey, Marjorie. Savannah. Hey, Adana. Alright, we'll give Earl Father Hines another minute or so. People tend to show up right at 8 o'clock or a couple of minutes after. Hey, Anna, welcome. Always glad to have first-timers here. Mother, when you said my aunt and uncle lived there, I thought we were still talking about Grimes for a second. I'm like, no, they haven't lived in Grimes in a long time. Now, Laura, we got a few grilled cheese restaurants around here. Hey, Florecita.
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by...
Alright, so halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines, that means that it's time for us to go ahead and get started. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago the book and H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. And I will have a Graceland Cemetery book scheduled for April through University of Illinois Press. I'm also on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time, so I am incredibly famous, and you should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. But alright, welcome along, everybody. Today we are going to be doing the Graceland, the Cemetery of Architects. Now, I've been giving Graceland tours for years. As I mentioned, I've got a whole book about Graceland Cemetery coming out. But when I do the walking tours there, I usually don't emphasize the architects. I'll show a couple of them, but I generally feel like if you aren't already familiar with an architect's work, seeing their grave really isn't going to be all that meaningful. But on a virtual tour, not only can I hit a few more of them, because we don't have as long to walk, but I can use some more multimedia stuff to show you some examples of the architecture and make seeing the grave a little bit more meaningful. So this is one of the virtual tours that doesn't really translate back into physical space. It's one that I'll be continuing to do just as a virtual one. So to get started with it, we are going to talk about some very basic Architecture 101 type stuff. We're going to start with, well, that is definitely not postmodernism. This is the Bozar style of architecture. I think I'm missing a button here. Okay. Bozar. I always pronounce it with the highfalutin French pronunciation. And I just realized highfalutin is one word, not two. We were discussing the phrase on the effing Chicago group chat, looked it up on the Oxford English Dictionary. Highfalutin is one word. So apparently there is no lowfalutin, but I certainly do not use lowfalutin when I pronounce Bozar, the style of architecture that was common in the late 19th and early 20th century. This is the old Federal Building in Chicago. This is where the Al Capone trial was. It's kind of a mixture of a lot of neoclassical style elements, and often buildings that could also be called neoclassical are sometimes just referred to as Bozar, or the other way around. You see a lot of things like the pediment roof, the dome, the ornamentation, the columns. Like the field is more of a one that we could say is more neoclassical. Looks like something out of ancient Greek. This is from outside of the time the Grateful Dead were playing at Soldier Field, and they put up a big banner saying everything is dead at the Field Museum. Very clever, I had to say. But let's zip around here a little bit. So this was the style that was really big in the late 19th and early 20th century, neoclassical and Bozar style. Then around the early 20th century, we started to move to things like the Chicago School of Architecture, as they called it, like the Marquette Building coming up right over here by Hollibird and Roche, a couple of guys who came out of William LeBaron Jenney's office. So the Chicago School is also buildings like this. These are the Chicago-style windows over at the Fisher Building. And around that same time, you had other things that kind of blended the gap between them, like the Rookery over on the left by Burnham and Root. But right down at the end of the road here, I'm just messing up the buttons here. Right down at the end of the road, this is the Board of Trade, the Art Deco style, the style that came next. More clean lines, streamlined verticality, the architecture of the Jazz Age. I always feel like these are like buildings out of DC Comics. Specifically, this one even was the Wayne headquarters in Batman Begins. Other examples of Art Deco would include like the Chrysler Building in New York City, the Carbide and Carbon Building here in Chicago. But then after that we had modernism. These very plain black rectangle buildings that became very popular in the mid-20th century. Very simple, very elegant buildings. On a really good one, you can never see the seams, you can never see the screws. And it's very popular to bash on these things. I find that this is every freshman architecture student's least favorite style, but they maintain a certain elegance. These buildings are 60 or 70 years old, and they still look just as modern as they were when they were built, which doesn't always happen. Like right after modernism, or somewhat concurrently with modernism, came brutalism. Stuff like this. Giant hulking slabs of concrete that have suddenly become cool again. In the last couple of years, I've all of a sudden started to hear people saying that they unironically love brutalism, which for a long time nobody was saying that. Then by the 1970s, we started seeing what is now called postmodernism, which really had been going on for a while, and it's a very, very broad style. It's a very broad term. I always say that anytime you see a building and don't know quite how to describe it, you can just say, oh, how postmodern, and you'll probably be right, and you'll probably sound really smart. Some examples are 77 Wacker, the United Building, which is kind of an updated take on those old rows of columns and Greek-style pediment roof. It kind of took an old style and updated it for the 90s, for the columns extend all the way down. Also, you can see by the same architect, Ricardo Bofill, the Citadel Center, which also has a little bit of a column thing there, but really a whole lot of glass. Or 311 South Wacker, which is an updated version of the Chicago Tribune Tower. But also 190 North LaSalle. This is also postmodernism, even though it just looks like it's taking its cues from old Gothic-style architecture. That's a lot of what postmodernism was just taking old styles and updating them for the 90s. So that's Architecture 101, just the very, very basics before we get started. So, at Graceland Cemetery, for one reason or another, lots of architects are at Graceland Cemetery. On the left is the statue Eternal Silence. On the right, the Kinsey family burial ground, which comes up for one reason or another in just about every tour. There's just so many stories in that family plot. So many wildly different stories. We got true crime, we got the Civil War. But under the tree here is a monument to William LeBaron Jenney, whose ashes were scattered somewhere around this place. He was one of the early trustees of Graceland Cemetery, had his hand in a lot of work around here. William LeBaron Jenney is best known in architecture circles for designing what is really known as the first modern skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building, 10 stories high. We call it the first modern skyscraper because it was the first one to be made with steel frame construction. It allowed buildings to be a lot lighter and to grow up a lot taller than they had been before. But his fingerprints are really all over this cemetery. For instance, over here is the Lyon family monument, and this was designed by his architectural firm, Jenney and Mundy. In fact, there's a very old picture of it that I absolutely love that was in an architectural magazine right around the time it was built in the early 20th century. Now, I can kind of use a cleanup since this one was taken, but they have been going through and cleaning up some of the larger monuments later, cleaning up and restoring. But I love that guy's hat. There was a time when people would just go to the cemetery to sit on a bench and read. I got to imagine he probably could have found a more comfortable bench than this. But still, the atmosphere counts for something. So Jenney was one of the early architects who really made his mark on Chicago in the 1880s. Around the same time, the biggest architect in town, perhaps, was Daniel Burnham. Now, up here on the lake in Graceland, this island was initially not planned to have any monuments on it. There was just going to be a gazebo. Some early drawings show a gazebo there. But after the architect Daniel Burnham died in 1910, his widow bought the space. Days later, his ashes were interred here, along with a few family members. It couldn't accommodate actual full casket burials here, I don't think. But Burnham died overseas. He had to be cremated to be shipped back. But Daniel Burnham designed things like the Rookery, along with his partner John Wellborn Root, who we'll hear more of later on. And look at this, how magnificent this is. Down at the bottom, you see the stone arch, a little bit of the influence of Henry Hobson Richardson and Richardsonian Romanesque styles. But what you see here is something that at the time would have been really quite unique. You can still see things like columns, but you've also got these large windows, these arched windows. It has some castellated features, but it's kind of been updated. In sort of a way, this was an early version of postmodernism, taking these ancient styles and updating them for the late 19th century. Now, Burnham is also known for things like the Flatiron Building in New York City. No, seeing him experiment with the different shapes. Triangular-shaped buildings were still pretty weird. But for years, people remembered him in Chicago not really as an architect so much as a city planner. In 1909, he released his Plan of Chicago, which isn't something that we followed to the letter, but it was kind of a guiding beacon for which a whole generation or two of city planners based all of their ideas for Chicago. Things like leaving the lakefront open, just keeping it one big parkland, having a bi-level road going around the business district. It is He's often quoted, just about every tourist trap you go to. On the wall, they will have the phrase painted, make no little plans. They have no magic in them to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and in work. And we historians always used to snicker about that because it was generally considered an apocryphal quote. It had only been traced back to like a company Christmas letter a couple of years after Burnham died. The general sense was that he probably said things like it, but had never actually said that all at once. But while I was doing research for the Graceland Cemetery book, I came upon this article from 1910 in the Chicago Record Herald, stirred by Burnham, champion of democracy champion. So it was a speech that Burnham gave in the UK in 1910, a couple of years before his death. And down at the bottom, there was the quote, word for word. Turns out he really did say it after all. Got my name in the paper for that one. And I love it when I actually get to solve a mystery in the course of this work. It's fun. And also, here's this, what remained of a snowman on Burnham's Island earlier this year. Just after the last couple of days we've had, I just wanted to throw in a snow picture really badly right now. What you could say right here, of course, is make no little snowmen. They melt faster. And of course, right next to Burnham, wrong button there. Right next to Burnham, I'll restart that clip, is Daniel Burnham Jr., who along with his brother Hubert formed the architectural firm of Burnham Brothers, or Burnham and Burnham. And these became Art Deco architects. After their father died in 1912, they became architects in their own right. There's not a lot of, they're not nearly as well known as people. They weren't, I guess, quite as gregarious or quotable. Here's about the only picture I could even find of Daniel Burnham Jr. was his passport photo. I'm sure there are more of them out there. But they built things like the Clark Adams Building, also known as the Bankers Building, which I think really needs a spruce up. It should all be one color, but it's kind of covered in soot over the years. But perhaps more famously, the Carbide and Carbon Building, which we just got some really great footage of from the rooftop of the Virgin Hotel the other night. Ah, that beauty. It's unmistakable. It's just having a green building like that just makes it instantly recognizable. There's so few buildings that get that experimental with colors. But this is the green and gold Carbide and Carbon building from 1930. It is often said that it was designed to look like a champagne bottle. It's more or less true. There is an entry in the Burnham Brothers' diary saying the builders wanted it to be the color of an old-fashioned champagne bottle, though visually it was more based on the look of the American Radiator building in New York, which is very much like this, but black instead of green. I love that one, but frankly, this one's a little more distinctive, and it does kind of look like an Art Deco champagne bottle, too. But we'll zip back a little bit to Burnham's partner, who died in the 1890s, right when the firm was at the height of their success, is also at Graceland, not too far away from him. This is John Wellborn Root. And built right on to his gravestone here is this design. And this is a design from the entry to the Phoenix building that he was working on at the time of his death. You can kind of see the same arch right there. Well, here's Burnham and Root back in their working days, sitting in front of a really gorgeous ornate fireplace. I don't know where this building is. I'm guessing this is quite possibly in the Rookery. They had their office up on the top floor of that. Be kind of fascinated to find out. It never occurred to me to look that one up before. Another mystery to solve. Love it. But yeah, here it is up close. There's the Phoenix building. So you can kind of compare what they were going for here. You can see the column rows up on the top. See the arch, the doors. So they built one of his designs onto his gravestone. I love it when they do something to personalize a gravestone like that. And right next to him on the right is his son, John Wellborn Root Jr., who, like Burnham's sons, went on to form an Art Deco architecture firm after their death. Art Deco wasn't the only thing that Hollibird and Root did, but it was quite a bit of it. They did things like 333 North Michigan, and we'll see several other examples over time. This is the Daily News building from the 20s. Now, incidentally, his first wife died in a car wreck, I believe it was a ship coming back from France where she'd been working in the Resistance. And her gravestone was designed by a Hollibird and Root architect, even though she wasn't around anymore. And I don't really have a picture of hers, but the architect was Herman Lackner, who is also at Graceland. He was primarily known for his work on houses, but he also designed a couple of gravestones that looked about like this, just very simple and elegant. But Root's partner was Hollibird's son. Moving into another father and son team. There's 3 major father and son teams. And they were never actually teamed up themselves, more like sons who followed in their father's footsteps. But Mr. Hollibird formed the firm of Hollibird and Roche. He and Mr. Roche had been working together in William LeBaron Jennings' office, and then ended up building the Marquette building, and a number of other buildings around Chicago. They were real icons of the world of the Chicago School of Architecture. It was what they called things like the Marquette building. This one that kind of simplified the ideas of Bozar and kind of came up with a brand new, very American style of architecture. They also, in fact, designed the chapel here at Graceland Cemetery. But then his son, Root Jr., teamed up with his son, Hollibird Jr., teamed up with Root Jr., and they designed things like the Chicago Board of Trade in 1930. Our finest piece of Art Deco, or 333 North Michigan. They became kind of the rock stars of Art Deco architecture, the same way that Cohn, Peterson, and Fox were the rock stars of 1990s postmodernism. Now we'll move off to the side of this. Hollibird is at this little outcropping of rocks, this plateau that I call Pride Rock. The coyotes kind of like to stand on the edge of it. Very Lion King looking. Linda, I have not shown inside the chapel. When I was filming these, it wasn't open. They've just opened it again. So I'll get footage of the inside of it pretty soon. But up on top of it, here's the coyotes hanging out on it. It's one of my favorite pictures I ever took. Or that one too, that's good. Behind Carolyn Kirkland, the gossip columnist also known as Madam X, is another member of her family, the architect Boyd Hill. Now, Boyd Hill is not one of your better-known architects, but if you're around Chicago, you have run into his work over time. He did things such as, well, here, I'll show the video version. down Lawrence Avenue to the Aragon Ballroom, Boyd Hill. And the Lawrence Arms, the Lawrence Hotel, which has been cleaned up a little bit like this. It's missing some of the Art Deco touches that it had when it was first built. But you can kind of see, if you look here, the similarity between the Aragon and the Lawrence Hotel. Both of which are Boyd Hill designs. And here's the other member in his plot, Carolyn Kirkland. I just love that picture of her. It's the only picture I felt compelled to pay for the Graceland book. Most people I could get from the public domain someplace. That one I had to pay to get the good scan. We'll move over here to H.H. Honore, which we're not really showing itself for the person. He was not an architect himself, a bit of a city planner. Or real estate developer is probably a better term, but it kind of veered into city planning in those days. But what's kind of cool there is these death's head motif, the winged angel, the winged baby heads that are all over it. That kind of matches what you see on, this is a headstone from Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. You would see a lot of this, like symbolizing the soul flying away, the face with the wings. There's Abraham Martling. There's also a John nearby. But this one was designed by the firm of, there's one of the names I think. It was Stanford White's firm in New York, who is best known for things like City Hall in New York. And his firm did a couple of different things around here. One of them is right across the way. H.H. Honore's daughter, Bertha, who became Bertha Palmer. McKim, Mead White. Sorry, every now and then a name just kind of drops out of my head. Sometimes mid-tour, which is awfully inconvenient. But right ahead of us, this Parthenon-looking thing is Potter and Bertha Palmer, also designed by McKim, Mead White. Now, Potter met Bertha when she was only 13. He was an adult by then, but according to legend, he said, "That girl's amazing. As soon as she's grown up, I'm going to marry her," which is really icky, but fits in perfectly with Stanford White, who is known to be very much like that himself. And eventually got himself shot for it. But McKim, Mead White really did more things in cemeteries in Chicago than anything else in Chicago. This is their monument to W.W. and Ava Kimball, the Kimball piano fortune. Well, we'll kind of walk by there. It's getting a bit of a look at the very worn-out angel sculpture, which was added after the rest of it. So I don't know if McKim, Mead White did the angel. So there's a couple of early pictures of it that it doesn't have the angel in place. But right back behind them is another architect, Louis Sullivan. Now, Louis Sullivan was generally associated with the Chicago school, but making much more ornate things than other people in the Chicago school. He really didn't like Daniel Burnham and the whole neoclassical thing that Burnham was a part of, especially in the World's Fair of 1893, where he brought back columns and Greek revival stuff in a really big way. He used to say that we were just getting to have a really American style of architecture. Then the World's Fair came along, and all of a sudden it was all just neoclassical again. Sullivan is especially known for his really elaborate things, such as his last one, the Krause Music Store here in Lincoln Square. I'll see how much bigger I can make this one. See all these very fancy ornamentations here. Or towards the end of his life, he was kind of unemployable. He had a reputation for being very difficult to work with and had kind of gone out of style. But he was designing things like the Jewel Box Bank in Grinnell, Iowa, where Grandma Bell used to bank. And we showed this one in person on a tour of Grinnell a few months ago now, when I happened to be passing through town. There's also some excellent bakeries in that town. I always had a really good hot roast beef sandwich there. But Sullivan also designed a couple of mausoleums right here in Graceland Cemetery. That's something we don't always stop to think about, that architects can get a lot of work designing mausoleums and gravestones. But this one is almost the perfect example of Louis Sullivan's architectural style, the Getty tomb. For a steel guy named Henry Getty, his daughter Alice is more interesting than he was, but that's a whole different story. But here we see things like the arches, the ornamentation, everything we associate with Louis Sullivan. But meanwhile, at the same time, in the same cemetery, he also designed this one for Martin Ryerson. the other partner in the Ryerson Steel firm that Henry Getty was a member of. And this one is more Egyptian revival. It's essentially the lower part of it is what is called a mastaba, one style of Egyptian tomb. Then up on top, of course, you've got a pyramid, instantly recognizable. And this one is, I wish I could open the door to show you this one. Probably shouldn't show you the picture of the bust on the inside, but the key cabinet at Graceland is really cool. They got a lot of really cool Scooby-Doo kind of keys. This is one of those. This is what the key to this mausoleum looks like. Man, that's cool. It's still kind of tricky to get the things open even when you got the key. There's a couple of them around Graceland that are often said to be Louis Sullivan designs just because they kind of look like it. Like this is Louis Boldenwick. And Mr. Boldenwick, especially the doors here, have a very Louis Sullivan style. And also Gustav Wilk right here. A contractor who built the Texas state capitol out of the same pink granite as this, according to legend. This is also occasionally said to be a Louis Sullivan. It's not. It's actually entirely possible that Gustav Wilk designed this one himself. So in fact, with the Texas State Capitol, the person who was actually the architect flaked out, so Wilk had to do most of the architecture work himself on this thing. Now, if you've ever gone by Graceland on the Red Line train, the one that is most visible by going through the train is this one on the left here. Come on, cameraman, focus. Let's get a close-up on that there, Jerry. That is Sheldon Anderson. He was a member of the firm Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White, which is what Daniel Burnham's company evolved into. Burnham and Burnham, his sons, was a whole different thing. But one of his main architects working for him was a guy named Ernest Graham. Graham spun off into his own firm, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. And these guys did things such as the Merchandise Mart, 1930, here on the right. Now, they weren't quite as jazzy or flashy in most of their Art Deco stuff as Hollibird and Roche, but they did do a lot of Art Deco. They kind of had to. It was the 20s and 30s. It was the style at the time. But you can also see their style in the Wrigley Building, one of Chicago's finest and most iconic buildings, or the Civic Opera Building, another Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Which also, this one is from 1929, and it used to be the next building that came up on the boat tours was this one, General Growth Properties. This is Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White in the 1950s. Look what a difference 2 decades can make. And these bits of corrugated metal that you see all over the place are now a part of the building that they put down at the bottom of this place. But let's move along. Speaking of the river, over here, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White also did this monument with the columns to the Chalmers family. He was in fact a superintendent, son-in-law of Alan Pinkerton. But next to him, easier to miss, is Lawrence or Lars Hallberg, who is not one of our better-known architects in Chicago, but he should come up on every architectural boat tour. He designed this building that is now probably the best example of the Chicago School of Architecture that you see on the Chicago River. This is the old Chase Sanborn Coffee Warehouse, the one coming up before the Merchandise Mart. And I've never been on a boat tour that actually mentioned Lars Hallberg, but that was one of his designs. It even says the Chicago School on there, not because of the architecture. It's like the Chicago School of Psychology is in the building or something like that. But Hallberg did quite a number of buildings around the city. Most of them aren't skyscrapers or anything, so they tend to be overlooked. But things like this townhouse in the Gold Coast, that's another Hallberg design. I really ended up finding quite a lot of Hallberg out there. But let's move to the side a little bit. You notice one thing in common with everybody I've talked about too so far is that so far it's all been dudes. And that's kind of the thing. Even today, architecture still suffers from being rather a boys' club. It's starting to change, like so many other industries. It's getting there. But perhaps the most prominent woman architect who has a monument in Graceland is Marion Mahoney Griffin. Now, whether I pronounce that Mahoney or Mahoney, people are going to write to me to correct me on it. Marion Mahoney Griffin right here, right next to Barbara Langtot of the Architecture Foundation, who wrote a book of her own about the architects at Graceland, and now has a spot right for herself there. Now, Marion was the wife of the architect Walter Burley Griffin, who was buried in India. But she got her start in Frank Lloyd Wright's firm. She was the first woman to be licensed as an architect in Illinois. You do need a license for that around here. But what she is best known for in Wright's firm is the paintings that she did. She would do these Japanese landscape-style paintings of Wright's designs, and it was really these paintings that made Frank Lloyd Wright famous. These were published and became very, very popular. But most of them she didn't sign. Most of them the artist wasn't even known for the longest time. And she had some unpleasant things to say about Frank Lloyd Wright herself. She referred to him as a canker sore who originated very little but spent most of his time claiming everything and swiping everything, whose vanity and malice killed the so-called Chicago movement. I always kind of wonder, every time I've been to the Frank Lloyd Wright studio building, there's a little Marion, Mahoney, Griffin, there's like a memorial plaque to her outside. I'm like, wonder if they're going to bring that up. They never do. There's a lot of things about Frank Lloyd Wright they do not bring up at the house and studio tour, unless you ask, and even then they often discourage you. She also has a beach named after her, a little park beach up here in Rogers Park. Let's move on just a little bit. A couple of the lesser-known ones. Now, usually the people who become well-known are the ones who build the really big skyscrapers. But every other kind of building needs an architect, too. Over here, we have got Dwight Perkins, who is primarily known for high schools around Chicago, including Carl Schurz High School, built in the Prairie School, and Lane Tech High School, and also another Prairie School building, Cafe Brower, right on the pond in Lincoln Park. This is where the haunted history tours begin for the Lincoln Park Zoo tours. When I say Prairie School, that was a style in the early 20th centuries associated with people like Frank Lloyd Wright. Easiest way to describe Prairie School is they focus more on the horizontal lines, whereas Art Deco is more vertical. That's oversimplifying things tremendously, but that's about what it is. Easiest way to describe it, anyway. Another Prairie School architect. I'll have to zip ahead here a little bit. Dr. Ernst Schmidt, the most respected radical anarchist in Chicago. Now, he specifically wanted no memorial, no funeral. He thought all that kind of stuff was barbaric, in fact. But his children decided they wanted a monument for him, and his son, Richard, happened to be an architect. So he designed them this rather elegant Prairie School-style monument. But he's also known for having designed things like the Wrigley Mansion in Lincoln Park. This was the mansion that was eventually inhabited by Mr. William Wrigley Jr., who built the Wrigley Building, for one thing. It also has his name on things like Wrigley Field, Wrigley Spearmint Gum. It was the gum that made him famous. Well, his advertising made him famous. And of course, he also designed one of Graceland's most famous monuments. We're kind of backing away from the Loudons here. You never want to turn your back on Pullman, who is right to the right. But perhaps Graceland's most famous monument, the Schoenhofen Pyramid. That is another Richard Schmidt design. He's got a few buildings around the Gold Coast as well. Walking down the road, oh, another snow shot. Oh, I need that right now. Like the new Weezer song, I need some of that. It's this rather unusual monument to Frederick Wolf. Usually statues in cemeteries are pointing upwards. So seeing one descending downwards is really rather unusual. But Frederick Wolf was an architect himself. He's perhaps best known for building things like the Schlitz Ice House and the Schlitz Brewery in Milwaukee. He was best known for his breweries, but he also designed things like the Anna Wolf House, which is here in the Gold Coast in Chicago. We follow the road just a little ways further up. We come to the Shaw family, first passing Sylvia Shaw Judson, the sculptor. And behind her, her father, Howard VanDoren Shaw. Howard VanDoren Shaw was primarily known for his innovative house designs in the late 19th and early 20th century. Should move that over to here. But he's probably best remembered now for designing the Market Square up here in the North Shore suburbs, which is generally credited as being the very first shopping center. And honestly, looking at it, I don't think that as a shopping center, it has ever really been improved on. It's a gorgeous design, kind of Tudor in its style, like that Shakespeare look. It's very elegant. It's right near, we've been by this one a couple of times on mini tours, and I didn't even notice it at the time. We went by it especially like we were doing Home Alone stuff back in December. I'm sure we'll do it again this December. But Shaw also designed the mausoleum for Kenneth Sawyer Goodman, which is right up here on the pond. This is, as I said, everybody, you could always get extra work like this. And this one, you can go around the front of it, too. How much of this did I film exactly? Now, this one is made to look as though it opens onto the water, as though you would have to sail across the pond to get a coffin into there. As far as we know, they never actually sailed a boat across the pond to bring a coffin up to the doors here. I say as far as we know. Most of the interments there are urns. But if you're being really careful, you could in fact get down there on your own. And there's a great view from right there, too. You just got to be careful. Here it is from a distance. But we'll move over just a ways from here. This is how it looks from across the pond. But just past him and past the famous Ernie Banks and Ruth Page monuments. And on the Saturday tour, we're going to be going up the other side of the pond. Almost every time we go up this side in the tours. But on Saturday, we're going to be really breaking the mold and going up the east end of the pond instead of the west. But I think there may be a picture missing here. But the one that was showing up there, maybe if I zip back to it and pause. Yeah. All right, Bruce Goff. Bruce Goff is one of my favorite architects to talk about. Bruce Goff was an architect around the time of the 1950s, the era of modernism. Simple, plain black rectangle style buildings. Goff was building things that looked like this. Or this. Love this place. I would totally live in this place. Or this. Now this material you'll see there, the crystal, is a bit of what is called cullet. It's what's left of the runoff material in a glass bending oven. And he likes to build with that stuff. If you look here at this particular place, you can see little chunks of it all over the place. In fact, it was taken from the wreck of this place. I believe a lot of his stuff doesn't really survive anymore, a lot of his best stuff. But here in Chicago, there's only a couple of Goff buildings in Chicago, including the Myron Bachman House that we talked about briefly just the other day on the Uptown tour. But his first one of his first designs was the Tupelo building, which is what we call the International School. That is stuff like, it's basically modernism without the elegance, to be honest. Things like the Equitable building. Now, he would later kind of disavow stuff like this and kind of get annoyed about the fact that so many modern architects were just making such a fetish out of the structure of the buildings. He said, I understand the structure can be beautiful. The human skeleton as a structure is beautiful. But do you want to shake hands with a skeleton? He was always good for a quote, Bruce Goff was. But just beside him, now, he was doing all of those buildings at a time when most people were building plain black rectangles. That is a style we most associate with Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, a German architect that we imported into Chicago when it became unsafe for him to be in Germany, as he was building modernist buildings and the Nazis wanted everything to be very classically German. So he started building plain black rectangles, made him look like a degenerate at the time. So we lured him here to Chicago. And just like his buildings, Mies is marked by a plain black rectangle here. A couple examples of his buildings are the IBM building that is now the AMA building here in Chicago, right on the river. and Federal Plaza, which is a whole connection of buildings replacing the older Bozar style building. But really, it's very impressive to stand in the middle of this. It really is. You do get a sense for just how elegant a good Mies building can be. Now, one of the newer additions here, one of what you could call the next generation after Mies, is Stanley Tigerman. There's actually a little rock garden around this space. I filmed it when it was really brand new. Well, this is Stanley Tigerman. It is often reported that in the 1933 World's Fair he won a beautiful baby contest. I could not independently verify that, but you can totally picture it looking at this shot of him. First building here in Chicago was the very modernist boardwalk apartments, but he sort of rejected the simplicity of modernism and was known for much more playful designs. Moving on, starting just a little bit later with this, is still kind of international school, but it's a little bit sillier than most international things. And then he would go on to building things like the Animal Crackers House, as this one was called. And even his Holocaust memorial in Skokie was designed with a lot of little touches. There are a lot of, like, the exact measurements are based on the temple. And there are a lot of little things here, like the darkness going into the light, dark on the left, then it becomes light, with things looking like a rising sun. There were a lot of things in here that he specifically imagined as a big fuck you to the Nazis. I know this isn't an effing Chicago tour, but I don't think it counts as swearing when you're talking about those guys. Now, I couldn't find this mural the other day, but I do have a picture of it. It's a mural that is inside his first building, and it says something to the effect of, well, I know where I'll be in the future. Graceland Cemetery. He was a pretty silly guy. Now, later in life, he said, I was reading the transcripts of my interviews, and man, I swore a lot. I called a lot of people a lot of names. Just south of him in this section is a whole area that is just full of architects' graves. Like, for instance, Walter Netsch has a monument right here, probably best known for University Hall, this brutalist structure on the University of Illinois campus. And a little ways behind him, and most of these people are not even actually buried here, they just have monuments here. Their ashes were scattered someplace else, or I think in some cases they're even buried someplace else. They just have what is called cenotaphs here. Monuments for which there's not actually a burial. And I know of at least one prominent architect who's already got a space for his monument here, too. I won't name names. But here, on the left is Fosler Kahn, on the right are Bruce Graham. These were architectural partners. Graham, the architect, Kahn, the engineer, primarily for Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, designing things like the Sears Tower or the Hancock Building. And just beside them, wrong button. And when it's a little bit rainy, the Graham one looks especially good, I think. Well, and then we've got Jacques Brownson, architect, it says right on his gravestone, who designed the Federal Plaza, the Daily Center here in Chicago, behind the Picasso, which is a very Mies-esque kind of building. And right next to him, Stanislaw Gladek, who's probably best known in Chicago for the Chase Tower, that big swooping one at Dearborn and Madison. Right on the spot where Antonio Lombardi was killed in 1928, in broad daylight. And also for the brutalist FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. And back behind them is the unmissable plot for a guy who wasn't an architect himself. Richard Nickel was an architectural photographer who in the 1950s and 60s and 70s made it his mission to try to document all of the buildings that we were losing in Chicago. In the 60s and 70s, we kind of lost our heads preservation-wise. A lot of great buildings, like Louis Sullivan mansions downtown. A lot of it just got lost. And Nickel tried to document as much of this stuff as he possibly could before it was gone. You see the title here, Dangerous Years. That's entirely true. Poking around these kind of buildings was not necessarily safe. And in getting these photographs, that's what happened. There was a collapse, and he was killed. But this is a picture of the inside of an old Louis Sullivan mansion that eventually became a French restaurant and then a folk music club in the 1960s, the Bear Club. But that, folks, is an awful lot of architects at Graceland Cemetery. So let me go ahead and plug the upcoming events. If you like Graceland and want to hear some completely different stories, come on out Saturday morning. I know it's going to be hot, but I'm there if you are. Graceland Cemetery, the Civil War. We're going to take a slightly different route. And, I'll talk about, it's not going to be all Civil War stuff, but this is what I'm basing my route around getting to the best Civil War graves. It's going to be one that I've never done in person before. I don't think I've even done that one virtually, Graceland, the Civil War. I really probably should. Follow that. We will go on next Saturday, September 4th. My usual typos. September 4th at 11 a.m. we will be doing Rose Hill Cemetery once again. In-person tickets are available at MysteriousChicago.com. I guess I just feel like August is never going to end, so I keep typing August. On our next virtual tour, I'm not really planning to do the regular virtual tour on Sunday morning. We got a lot going on this weekend with my kid getting ready for college and everything. But the next big virtual one will be Thursday, September 2nd. We're going to do Murder Tales from Early Chicago, one that I've only done a couple of times. But of course, we'll continue doing the morning mini tours every day. And Friday evenings at 6:30, we do the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page show Whiskey and a Cookie, in which we drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the day. And often as not, make prank phone calls to politicians who I decide probably deserve it. All right, now, should you want a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, t-shirt, hoodie, flask, etc., cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago has what you need, including the new shirts for Mystericon, October 1st through 3rd. We're going to be cramming that weekend with events, starting with the boat tours on October 1st. And initially, I thought that I was going to be doing the Lincoln Park Haunted History Tours of the Zoo on the 2nd. Turns out they want to start that the next week. So, we're actually going to have that Saturday open. I'm trying to figure out what I can fill Saturday night with, but I'll come up with something pretty cool for you guys, I'm sure. I'm hoping to do Grave Robbing 101. It's just kind of an iffy proposition whether the landscaping is going to be ready in time. That's my goal. And all right, everybody, with that, that's the old button. Where's the new button? There we go. All right, everybody. So thanks a lot for joining me. With that, I will put Earl Father Hines back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Yeah, typos, I know. Been a long day, as the song goes. Well, it's been a long day. The next time travel pub crawl, I'm not sure, but I'm thinking of doing a time travel brunch crawl. One of these days soon. But people aren't showing up for the Sunday tours in numbers we need anymore, so maybe that'll inject some new life into it. Now, Susan, these architects generally worked all over the place. I'm just more focused on their Chicago stuff. Thanks, Chuck. Chuck, I meant to have that box of Monster Mash up on the mantle today. I just forgot at the last second. Chuck brought me a box of Monster Mash cereal. It's the new mashup of all the Monster cereals, Count Chocula, etc. As a cereal, frankly, it's just okay, but the box is so awesome. Debbie, I've got a thing about the, about wheelchair accessibility on the boat. I've had people on there on wheelchairs many times. The trick is that getting there, it's a kind of a rocky terrain. The rest of it, I've had wheelchairs on most of the things. These are Chicago streets. It can present certain challenges, but it's all just outdoor stuff, so it should be all right. Alex, yeah, I'll see you for Find a Grave Friday. Yes, George, you hired Solon Beeman many times. And tomorrow morning will be Find a Grave Friday. For those of you who don't know, that is Friday mornings I go to a cemetery where I know a certain person is buried, but I don't look up where, or where in the cemetery, or what the gravestone looks like. So we play hot and cold until we find them. And sometimes if it's unmarked, we just have to find about as close as we can come as last week. Dan, check the videos page about 10 minutes after the broadcast ends. You can go back and fact check me. I'm pretty sure I got most of it right this time. Thanks, Linda. Alfonso, yes I do. My stepson is 18. And I'm the same age my parents were when I was 18. Welcome along, Dan. We're just into the post-tour hang now.
And have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset.
Tomorrow? I know where we're going tomorrow, but I'm not telling. I've only very rarely, I think once or twice, I might have hinted where I was going ahead of time. I don't know if I'm really qualified to do a whole book on architects. Architecture is a field where people can get very detail-oriented, and I get in over my head pretty quickly. I'm great for tour guide level stuff. Ava, I don't intend to just stop them outright, though they'll probably be a little bit more rare in October when I've got in-person stuff all the time. But then we'll be back back for the winter. Thanks, Kathy.
Every blade of grass where I roam, whisper as I pass every home. Hand in hand, we'll stand beneath the moon and bid the Colorado sunset good night.
I'll probably still film something on Sunday anyway. But we got stuff going on this particular Sunday. Most notably, we've got to go to get to we've got to go. We got an appointment to meet some kittens. What gives the Carbide building its green colors is the stone they used. If there was a filament that they added to it or something, or a pigment. Dan, Earl Father Hines is pretty well known. There's probably stuff all over the place. This one I got on archive.org. We have some kittens. We don't think Miles likes being an only cat. Thank you, Lisa. I'm not sure how we can arrange to have Miles have much of a say in the new kit. We're going to pick whichever one seems to like us. Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. No, I have not. That'd be an excellent idea. It's just their cemeteries are kind of a commute for me. You see what I look at behind my camera? Yeah, you can see that. It's behind me. I have to hold desk these shelves the whole time. With a signed spatula by Weird Al. Some other materials like that. That's what I'm staring at. I'm staring at the wall. With the computer mounted up on top of something high enough that you don't see my double chin looking down at you. Speaking of Miles, I'll find him in a minute. Gwendolyn Brooks I have been to, so I'd kind of be cheating if I did ever find a grave. So I know kind of approximately where it is and what it looks like. Let me go see where Miles is.
So now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of Earl Father High. Yeah, but now comes,
Okay,
the Rohe.
Still looking for Miles. There may be some hammering sounds coming. We're building stuff for the other bedroom, you know. Miles, are you in one of the windows? Is that where you've gone?
Can be told,
No.
told in all its glory. Now that we have met,
Who's hiding today?
we know the sentimental story. The greatest romance that ever knew, waiting to unfold. Now it can be told, told as inspiration. Every other tale of boy meets girl is just an imitation. The great love story has never been told before, but now it can be told.
Where were you hiking? Okay, I didn't find him. He just kind of showed up. There's my pretty kitty. Yeah. I came in and saw him here and realized, oh, you guys probably just saw him before I did. Don't know where he was hiding. Okay. Oh, there's the guy himself. And now I probably got to give him some play time. So let's make this smaller. I'll show you some more of the floor. Here, Miles. Are you just chasing?
Loving arms are clinging beside a molded tree.
Some the people have well you couldn't jump.
My heart is a tom-tom beating so fast. If this is only a dream, then why can it last forever, darling? The riverman sweetly shine completely beside a moonlit stream.
Good one. And he's just getting warmed up, too. Miles says hi, Morgana. And sometimes he'll do like a whole backflip and catch the thing mid-jump. And he is obsessed with that toy. Layla got it for him almost 3 months ago, and it's all he wants to play with. And if I leave him alone, I'll find him out here playing with it by himself. Wembley, that's a nice name for a cat.
And now comes up number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled, melodically,
Have a good night,
In
Sue.
the Twilight.
Miles is still down there playing with his cat dancer himself right now. You see what this is? This is like a bendy piece of metal with these 4 pieces of jute twine at the end. I think it's jute twine. Oh, good one. Those are some good backflips, Miles. Can you catch it? Oh, okay. If you're gonna fall over, it's time to stop. There we go. Hello, Frosty. Yeah, he loves this thing. He wants to play with it all the time. Laszlo is also a good name for a cat. Now I got the laser light for him too, but that makes him mad. I'll turn down the Earl, see if you can actually hear him here. I'll pause Earl, see if you can hear the noise he's about to make here. I'll just switch over to the MacBook. Sometimes when I turn the thing around, it disconnected the microphone. We should be back now. The comments will take 20 seconds to turn back up. That would be this thing, not Pullman. This microphone is like 10 years old now, you know. More than that, even. Miles, come on up here. Come on. I'm not sure I could get Miles to the con. But Kathy, I know they're cherubim. I'd rather call them baby heads, personally. Interesting that it holds on to that word, hangs on to the old Hebrew pluralization. See you tomorrow, Bob. Seraphim is another that I guess uses the im for plural. Georgie, I think that's a very nice name. Yeah. See, I just don't think Miles would enjoy the travel very much. Getting clear down to the Palmer house. Thanks, Amy. Hope to see you before then. And Miles, the only time Miles has occasionally run down the stairs outside of the apartment, but when the tornado sirens were going, when we took him down to the basement, he hated that. Next time they went off, I just shut him in the closet. Figured that was just about as safe and not as traumatizing for him. He likes the closet. But he was so freaked out in the basement, it was sad. Have a good night, Betsy and Kathleen. He's still sitting here, you know. Picky. I gotta click at that street. All right, have a good night, Octavio. Night, Ava. All right, now Earl Father Hines is wrapping up, it sounds like, so I'm going to go ahead and quick plug the upcoming things. This should actually be September 4th. Next Saturday, we are doing Rose Hill Cemetery. This Saturday morning, we are doing the Civil War route at Graceland Cemetery. That means that I've picked the route that'll go by the most interesting Civil War stories. We'll also hit a lot of the other Graceland hits of the cemetery along the way, of course, but different route that means different stories. I'm pretty excited about that. Then next Saturday will be the Rose Hill Cemetery tour. In-person tickets are available at MysteriousChicago.com, as well as the October 1st late boat tour still has tickets available. Next virtual tour, the full-length virtual tour anyway, will be next Thursday, September 2nd. September. We're actually getting into autumn tours now. I'm so ready to be done with August. Murder Tales from early Chicago. So lots of cool stuff coming up here as always. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I am Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I will see you in the morning for Find a Grave Friday. And until then, stay safe, stay strong. And of course, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, stay spooky. Have a great night, everybody.